Kael Ashford made the worst decision of his life on a Tuesday, under a sky full of stars that had no business being so beautiful for what he was about to do. The bonfire crackled at the center of the clearing. Every wolf in the Blackmore pack stood in a loose circle around it, their faces lit orange and gold, their breath visible in the October chill. 300 wolves, maybe more. The elders stood closest to the flames, their silver hair catching the light. The younger wolves pressed in behind them, restless, shifting their weight the way wolves do when they can feel something coming but cannot name it. Kael stood at the northern edge of the fire. He was 23 years old. He had been Alpha King for exactly 41 days. His father had died in a border skirmish that should have been routine, and now the crown sat on a head that was still learning how to hold it steady. He felt her before he saw her. The scent hit him first. Honeysuckle and iron. Sweet and sharp at the same time, like biting into fruit that fights back. His wolf surged inside his chest so hard that his knees almost buckled. Every nerve in his body lit up like someone had plugged him into a wall socket. His heart rate doubled, his hands shook, his vision sharpened, until he could count the eyelashes on every wolf in the front row. Mate! The word exploded through him like a detonation. Mate! Mine! Now! Forever! He turned his head. Seraphina Voss stood 12 feet away, half hidden behind the broad shoulder of an older woman. She was 20 years old, brown-haired, wide-eyed, wearing a green jacket that was too big for her, and boots caked with mud from the trail. She was looking right at him. Her eyes were gold. Not brown with gold flecks. Gold. The kind of gold that meant her wolf was right at the surface, pressing against the inside of her skin, recognizing what was happening at the same moment he did. Her lips parted. Just slightly. Just enough. The bond snapped into place between them, like a steel cable pulled tight. He could feel her heartbeat inside his own chest, could feel the heat of her skin from 12 feet away, could feel the way her wolf was howling with joy, with relief, with the bone-deep certainty that the search was over. And then Kael looked past her, at the older woman she stood behind, at the face he recognized, Helen Voss, former Beta's wife. The woman who had stood beside her husband when he tried to split the Blackmore pack in half 3 years ago. The woman whose family name was still spoken with the same tone people use for rotten food. Seraphina's mother. Which made Seraphina the daughter of Graham Voss, the traitor, the wolf who had recruited 17 pack members into a secret alliance, who had planned to challenge Kael's father for the alpha position, who had been caught only because a 14-year-old border guard overheard the wrong conversation at the wrong time. Graham Voss, who was now rotting in exile somewhere north of the Canadian border, stripped of rank, stripped of pack, stripped of everything except the family name that followed his daughter like a shadow she could not outrun. Kael's blood went cold. He looked at Seraphina again. She was still watching him. Her eyes were still gold. Her wolf was still singing. And the bond between them was still pulling, trying to close the 12 feet of firelit space between them, with the gravity of something that had waited 1,000 years to happen. His gamma, Owen, appeared at his elbow. Owen was 32, scarred across the jaw, built like someone who had been assembled from spare parts of larger men. He leaned in close enough that only Kael could hear him. "Tell me that is not what I think it is." Kael said nothing. "She is a Voss," Owen said. "You know what happens if you claim a Voss? Half the council walks. The families who lost members to Graham's little rebellion, they will not stand for it. You will have a pack split within 6 months. I know. You are 41 days into your reign. Your father's allies are still deciding whether to be your allies. You do not have the political capital to spend on this. I know." Owen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" Kael watched the firelight play across Seraphina's face. She had started to move toward him. Just a step, just one step closer. Her chin was lifted, and her shoulders were squared, and she looked like someone walking toward the rest of her life. He turned away from her. The crowd parted for him because it always did. He walked to the flat stone at the center of the clearing, the one his father had used for announcements, for judgments, for the rituals that held a pack together through the long winters and the lean years. He stepped up onto it. 300 faces looked up at him. "There is a mate bond," he said. His voice carried the way an alpha's voice carries, not louder than normal speech, but deeper, resonant, impossible to ignore. "I feel it. My wolf recognizes it. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Heads turned. Eyes found Seraphina. I reject it. The silence that followed was so complete that Kael could hear the fire breathing. Seraphina had stopped moving. She stood 5 feet closer than where she had started, frozen mid-step, her weight still tilted forward. Her gold eyes were locked on him. Her mouth was open. Not in shock, exactly. In the space before shock arrives. Kael spoke the words. The ancient ones. The severance rite that had been carved into the pack's history like a scar that never fully healed. He spoke them in the old language first, then in English, because the ritual required both. He spoke them clearly and steadily, because he had practiced them in his bedroom an hour ago, pacing back and forth in front of the mirror, saying the syllables until they stopped tasting like ash in his mouth. That was a lie. They never stopped tasting like ash. He said them anyway. Seraphina's chest caved. Not a metaphor. Her ribcage visibly contracted, her shoulders curling inward, her body folding around the place where the bond had been like hands closing around a wound. A sound came out of her that Kael would hear for the rest of his life. Not a scream, not a cry, a breath, just a breath, pushed out of her lungs by the force of something being ripped away. The crowd watched. Some looked away, most did not. Helen Voss reached for her daughter. Seraphina stepped back, away from her mother's hand, away from the fire, away from 300 pairs of eyes, and one pair in particular that she would not look at again. She straightened. That was the part. Right there. That was the moment Kael would replay 10,000 times in the years that followed. The moment she straightened. Her spine went rigid. Her chin came up, her fists closed at her sides, white-knuckled, trembling, but closed, controlled. She did not cry. She did not beg. She did not ask why. She looked at him the way you look at a locked door. You measure it. You note the weight of it, the material, the hinges. You understand that it is not going to open, and then you turn around and find another way through the building. Seraphina turned around. She walked toward the tree line. Her boots crunched on dry leaves. Her green jacket disappeared into the shadows between the pines. She was gone before the fire burned down. Kael stood on the flat stone for a long time after the clearing emptied. Owen waited nearby, arms crossed, saying nothing. The fire collapsed into embers. The stars kept shining, because they did not care about the small cruelties of wolves. You did the right thing, Owen said finally. Kael stepped down from the stone. His legs felt strange, disconnected, like they belonged to a body he was only renting. His wolf had gone silent, not calm, silent. The difference was enormous. I know, he said. He walked back to the Alpha house alone. The hallway was dark. His bedroom was dark. He sat on the edge of his bed and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes until he saw colors that did not exist. She did not cry. She looked at him like a locked door. She walked into the trees with her spine straight. He would have preferred screaming. He would have preferred rage or bargaining, or the kind of ugly public collapse that would have made it easier to believe he had rejected someone who could not handle what the world threw at her. Instead, she had handled it perfectly, and that meant he had just thrown away someone who could handle anything. His wolf stirred then, just once. A low, grinding howl that started in his stomach and climbed into his throat and lodged there like a bone he could neither swallow nor cough up. Kael turned on every light in the room and did not sleep. By morning, Seraphina Voss had crossed the northern border of Blackmore territory. Her trail ended at the river. The trackers reported that she had waded upstream for 2 miles before climbing out on the far bank, and after that the scent was gone, dissolved into pine sap and moving water, and the wild emptiness beyond the pack's reach. Helen Voss came to the Alpha house at noon. She stood in the doorway of Kael's office and said nothing for 30 seconds. Then she said, "My daughter survived her father's disgrace. She survived being the most hated name in this pack for 3 years. She would have survived being your mate." Kael looked at her. "I could not afford the risk." "You could not afford her," Helen said. "There is a difference." She left. She sold her house by the end of the week and followed her daughter north. The pack moved on. Packs always do. There were borders to patrol and disputes to settle, and a young alpha to watch for signs of strength or weakness. The name Voss faded from daily conversation, then from weekly conversation, then from conversation altogether. But Kael noticed things, small things. The way his wolf went rigid every full moon, straining northward like a compass needle dragged off true. The way certain scents gutted him without warning. Honeysuckle growing wild along the southern fence line. The iron tang of a training blade after a sparring session. He started avoiding the clearing where the bonfire had been. Started taking the long way around the eastern trail so he would not pass the spot where she had stood. He took no mate. His counsel pushed candidates at him the way you push food at someone who has lost their appetite. Daughters of allied alphas, strong wolves from good bloodlines. Women who were smart and capable and beautiful in ways that did not matter because they smelled wrong. Not bad, just wrong. Like standing in the right room in the wrong house. Owen stopped asking about it after the first year. 3 years passed. Kael Ashford became the alpha king his pack needed. Steady, strategic, hard when hardness was required. He brokered a trade agreement with the Ironwood pack. He settled a land dispute with the southern clans that had been festering for a decade. He expanded Blackmoor's territory by 12%, without a single challenge going to blood. He was good at being king. He was terrible at being whole. And somewhere north of the border, past the river, past the pines, past the reach of every tracker he had quietly sent and recalled before they got too close, Seraphina Voss was becoming something the wolf world was not prepared for. The Silver Pine pack lived in the kind of territory that mapmakers forgot about on purpose. Dense forest, steep ridges, creeks that froze solid in November and did not thaw until April. The nearest human town was 40 miles south, a gas station and a post office and a bar called The Pint that served coffee so strong it could strip paint. Alpha Marin Cole ran Silverpine the way a retired general runs a garden, precisely, without hurry, with the calm understanding that things grow whether you fuss over them or not, and that the ones worth keeping are the ones that survive the frost. She was 58 years old, silver-haired, built like a fence post, narrow and hard and impossible to knock over. She had been alpha for 22 years, and she planned to die in the job because retirement sounded boring, and she had never been good at being bored. Her pack was small, 90 wolves. Maybe 100 if you counted the ones who drifted in and out of the territory like leaves on a slow current. Silverpine was not powerful. It was not wealthy. What it was, and what Marin had spent 2 decades making it, was safe. Wolves who had nowhere else to go ended up at Silverpine. Exiles. Runaways. Wolves whose packs had dissolved in territorial disputes. Wolves who had been born without packs at all. Marin collected them the way other people collect stories. She listened. She fed them. She put them to work. She did not ask where they came from, unless they wanted to tell her. Seraphina arrived on a Thursday. It was raining. She was soaked through, her green jacket dark with water, her boots leaving prints on the wooden porch of Marin's cabin. She had been walking for 4 days. She had eaten twice. Marin opened the door and looked at her for a long time. Not with pity, with the careful, measuring gaze of a woman who had seen 100 broken wolves and learned to tell the difference between the ones who wanted to be fixed and the ones who wanted to be forged. "You smell like someone who is about to become a problem for whoever broke you," Marin said. Seraphina stood in the rain and said, "I need a pack." "No," Marin said, "you need a purpose. The pack comes after." She opened the door wider. The first 6 months were brutal. Marin's head trainer was a wolf named Connor Gray. He was 40, silent, built like a wall with opinions. He had been a border enforcer for a larger pack before an injury took out his left knee, and his former alpha decided that damaged wolves were not worth feeding. Marin found him sleeping in a ditch outside her territory and told him he could stay if he stopped feeling sorry for himself and started being useful. Connor trained Seraphina the way a blacksmith works iron. Heat, pressure, repetition. No kindness and no cruelty, just the relentless expectation that she would be better tomorrow than she was today. She was terrible at first, not weak, undisciplined. She fought with emotion, throwing herself at opponents with the raw desperation of someone trying to outrun her own thoughts. Connor let her lose, over and over. He put her on the ground 17 times in their first week, and each time he stood over her and said the same thing. Get up. Feel less. Think more. She hated him for about 3 weeks. Then she started listening. By the end of the first month, she could hold her own against the mid-ranked fighters. By the end of the third, she was pinning wolves who had been training for years. Something was changing in her, and it went deeper than technique. The severed mate bond had left a hole in her chest, a ragged, empty socket where the connection to Kael had been ripped out. Most wolves who survived a rejection spent years trying to fill that hole, drinking, fighting, taking lovers who could not quite reach the frequency that the bond had operated on. Seraphina did not try to fill it. She built around it. She took that empty space and used it like a listening device. With the bond gone, she discovered that she could sense things other wolves missed. The way a room shifted when someone was about to lie, the micro-expressions that preceded aggression, the half-second flinch of the shoulders that telegraphed a punch before the arm moved. She could read dominance the way a musician reads a score, every note visible, every hierarchy transparent. Connor noticed. He brought it to Marin. She is not just getting better, he told the alpha. She is getting different. Different how? Her instincts are not beta instincts. They are not even gamma instincts. She reads a fight the way an alpha reads a fight. Top down, strategic, like she can see the whole board. Marin said nothing. She had been watching Seraphina for months, and she had noticed something Connor had not. When Seraphina gave an order during training, the other wolves obeyed. Not because she outranked them. She did not. They obeyed because something in her voice made their wolves go quiet and attentive in a way that had nothing to do with pack hierarchy and everything to do with something much older. The rogue attack happened in October, exactly 1 year after Seraphina arrived. Silver Pine's southern border backed up against unclaimed forest, the kind of no man's land where lone wolves and rogues drifted through like weather. Most of them were harmless, desperate, starving, not looking for trouble. Marin had a standing policy: feed them, offer them a place. If they refused, let them pass. These rogues were not the harmless kind. There were 9 of them, organized, armed with the kind of cold-eyed coordination that meant someone had been training them. They hit the southern border just before dawn, when the patrol was thinnest, cutting through the tree line in a V formation that was designed to punch through a defensive line and keep moving. Clara Finch was leading the border patrol that morning. She was 26, fast, reliable, and completely outmatched. She had 3 wolves with her. The rogues hit them hard and scattered the formation within seconds. Clara went down with a wound across her shoulder. 2 of her wolves were pinned against a rock face with no room to maneuver. Seraphina was running a solo perimeter check a quarter-mile east when she heard the howl. She did not think. She ran. The trees blurred past her in streaks of brown and gray. She could hear the fight before she could see it. Snarling. The crack of impact. Clara's voice, ragged and furious, shouting commands that her wolves could not follow because the formation was gone. Seraphina came through the tree line at a dead sprint and hit the nearest rogue from the side. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and force. She was back on her feet before he was, her position already shifting to put herself between Clara and the 2 rogues closest to her. "Get behind me," she said to Clara. "I outrank you." "Get behind me." Clara looked at her. Something in Seraphina's voice, something that went deeper than rank or protocol, something that vibrated at a frequency Clara's wolf recognized on a level that had no words. Clara moved behind her. The rogues regrouped, 7 of them still standing, fanning out in a half circle. Seraphina stood at the center of the gap, 4 silver pine wolves behind her, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not the bond, not that empty socket where Kael had been. Something else entirely. Something that came from a place she had never accessed before. A deep well of power that sat below her wolf, below her training, below everything she had learned and practiced and earned. It rose through her like a tide that had been waiting for the shore. Her eyes changed. Not gold. Silver. A bright, clean, mercury-colored silver that threw the early morning light back at the rogues like a mirror. The air around her compressed. That was the only way to describe it. The pressure wave that rolled off her was not physical, not exactly, but every wolf in a 100-yard radius felt it in their bones. The rogues froze. Their wolves, the animal intelligence that lived inside them and drove their instincts, went flat, submissive, terrified. It did not matter that their human minds wanted to fight. Their wolves had recognized something ancient and absolute in those silver eyes, and the wolves were done. 2 rogues turned and ran, then 3 more. The remaining 2 dropped to their knees, heads lowered, throats exposed. The universal wolf gesture of surrender. Clara stared at Seraphina from behind her. The two pinned wolves stared. Even the rogue on the ground, the first one Seraphina had tackled, stared up at her from where he lay with wide eyes and a slack mouth. Seraphina stood in the middle of the trail, with silver light bleeding from her eyes, and her hands trembling at her sides, and no idea what had just happened. Marin arrived 20 minutes later. She walked through the aftermath of the fight, past the surrendered rogues who were now bound and guarded, past Clara who was getting her shoulder wrapped, past the wolves who kept glancing at Seraphina and then looking away like they had stared at the sun. She stopped in front of Seraphina, looked into her eyes, which had faded back to their usual brown, but still carried a faint silver ring around the iris that had not been there before. "Well," Marin said, "that explains a few things. What just happened to me?" "Your mother's bloodline happened to you." Seraphina shook her head. "My mother was a beta's wife. She was not even ranked. She was nobody. Your mother was Helen Ashworth before she married your father and took the Voss name. The Ashworth line predates the modern pack system by 400 years. They were the original alphas, the ones who organized wolves into packs in the first place. Most of that bloodline died out or diluted into nothing. Apparently, your mother's did not." Seraphina stood very still. The forest was quiet around them. A bird sang somewhere overhead, oblivious to everything. Why did she never tell me? Because power like yours does not announce itself until it is needed. Your wolf was waiting for you to be ready. Ready for what? Marin smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess player who has just watched a piece reveal that it can move in directions the board was not designed for. For whatever comes next, word spread. It always does among wolves. Not through phones or letters or official communications, but through the network of scent and rumor and instinct that connected every pack territory, like an underground root system. The story of the silver-eyed wolf who had turned 9 rogues inside out without throwing a second punch traveled from Silverpine to the neighboring territories within a week. Within a month, it had reached the eastern packs. Within 3 months, every alpha with a working nose and half a brain knew the name Seraphina Voss. Most of them were curious. Some were nervous. A few were smart enough to be afraid. Marin promoted Seraphina to her inner circle, not as beta, because Silverpine already had a beta, a quiet woman named Nora Beck who had been at Marin's side for 12 years and was more than capable. Marin created a new position, Enforcer Prime, the wolf who stood at the Alpha's right hand, not for politics or protocol, but for the moments when politics and protocol failed and something sharper was required. Seraphina trained harder, not because Marin demanded it, but because the power inside her was like a river she had to learn to direct before it carved its own path. She spent hours with Connor, who had stopped putting her on the ground months ago and was now learning as much from her as she was from him. She sparred with Nora, who fought with a patience and intelligence that forced Seraphina to think 3 moves ahead instead of 1. She ran the borders alone at night, miles of dark forest unspooling beneath her paws, learning the territory until she could navigate it blind. She did not think about Kael Ashford. That was a lie she told herself, and she was smart enough to know it was a lie, and she told it anyway, because the alternative was a door she was not ready to open. The bond was gone. She was certain of that. The empty socket in her chest no longer ached the way it had in the first months. It had hardened into something she barely noticed most days, the way a scar becomes just another texture on your skin. She did not miss him. She did not wonder what he was doing. She did not, on certain nights when the wind came from the south and carried scents she could not name, stand at the edge of Silverpine territory and breathe in until her lungs burned. She did not do any of those things. 2 years after her arrival, Marin called her into the cabin and poured her a drink. Whiskey, neat. The good stuff that Marin kept in the locked drawer for occasions that mattered. "Dominic Vale wants to meet you," Marin said. Seraphina took the glass. The Ironcrest Alpha, 3rd most powerful wolf in the region. Smart. Political. Not the kind of man who makes social calls. What does he want? Publicly, an alliance with Silverpine. He has rogue problems along his western corridor, and he thinks our border tactics could help. And privately? Marin drank. Privately, he wants to see the wolf with silver eyes for himself. He has heard the stories. He wants to know if they are true. And what do you want me to do? I want you to go to the Interpack Summit next month and be exactly what you are. Let Dominic see. Let all of them see. Marin set her glass down. It is time the wolf world learned that Seraphina Voss is not a girl who got thrown away. She is a force that got set free. Seraphina looked at the amber liquid in her glass, held it up to the light from Marin's window, drank it in one swallow. Fine, she said. I will need a new dress. Marin laughed, and the sound carried through the cabin walls and out into the silver pine night, where the wolves on patrol heard it and glanced at each other and wondered what their alpha found so funny. The Interpack Summit was held in a place called the Stone Hall. It was exactly what the name promised. A massive natural cavern in the mountainside where the borders of 4 territories met, carved out by water 10,000 years ago, and claimed by no pack because it was claimed by all of them. The ceiling rose 60 feet overhead, studded with formations that caught the light of 1,000 lanterns and threw it back in fractured gold. The floor was polished granite, worn smooth by centuries of wolf feet. Archways opened onto terraces that overlooked a valley, so deep and green, it looked like something from before the world got complicated. Every alpha within 6 territories attended. It was not optional. The summit was older than any living pack, older than the pack system itself, a tradition that predated written records and operated on the simple principle that wolves who drank together were less likely to eat each other. Kael Ashford arrived with a delegation of 12, Owen at his right, his new beta, a sharp-eyed woman named Eliza Marsh, at his left, 10 enforcers behind them, dressed in the dark formal wear that the summit required, looking like a wall of tailored displeasure. 3 years had changed Kael. Not softened, sharpened, his jaw was harder, his eyes were older. A thin scar ran along the left side of his chin, a souvenir from a challenge fight the previous winter that had gone 4 rounds before Kael put his opponent on the ground and held him there until the submission came. He moved through the stone hall the way large predators move through open space, aware of every eye on him and supremely indifferent to all of it. He was not indifferent. He was performing indifference, and the performance had become so polished over 3 years that even Owen could not always tell the difference. The ballroom occupied the largest chamber of the stone hall. It was absurd, really. Wolves in formal wear, standing on ancient stone, holding crystal glasses of champagne, and pretending they were not all calculating threat levels and escape routes. The string quartet in the corner played something classical that echoed off the cavern walls and turned every note into 3. Kael positioned himself near the eastern archway, where the terrace doors stood open, and the night air cut the warmth of the crowd. He held a glass he had no intention of drinking. He nodded at the alphas who approached him, exchanged the careful pleasantries that meant nothing and cost everything, and kept his expression at the precise midpoint between approachable and untouchable. He had been there for 40 minutes when the scent reached him. Honeysuckle and iron. His body reacted before his mind caught up. His spine went rigid. His pupils dilated. His wolf, that silent, wounded thing that lived in his chest and barely stirred anymore except on full moons, slammed against the inside of his rib cage so hard that his vision stuttered. Owen noticed. His hand moved to Kael's arm. What is it? Kael did not answer. He was scanning the ballroom with a focus that burned everything else out of his visual field. The crowd, the dancers, the clusters of wolves standing in their careful political formations along the walls. He found her. She was on the dance floor. She was wearing a dress the color of a deep bruise, plum and black, woven together in a fabric that moved like water when she turned. Her hair was longer than he remembered, swept over one shoulder, exposing the line of her neck, where his mark should have been, where the skin was smooth and bare and belonged to no one. She was dancing with Dominic Vael. Kael knew Dominic by reputation and by sight. Iron Crest Alpha, 31 years old, tall, dark-haired, with the kind of easy confidence that came from being born powerful and growing into the power, without any of the scrambling desperation that marked wolves who had to fight for their position. Dominic moved well. His hand sat on the small of Seraphina's back with the relaxed familiarity of a man who had been allowed to put it there before. The glass in Kael's hand cracked. Not shattered. A single fracture line running from the rim to the base, splitting the crystal like a fault line. Champagne bled over his knuckles, cold and fizzing, and he did not feel it. He did not feel anything except the white-hot, world-narrowing fury of watching another alpha's hand rest on the lower back of the woman his wolf had never stopped claiming. The temperature in the ballroom dropped. Not a metaphor. The wolves closest to Kael felt it first. A pressure change, a compression of the ambient energy in the room that pressed against their eardrums and tightened their chests. Glasses rattled on the nearest serving tray. A younger wolf standing by the bar made a sound in her throat and took a step backward without knowing why. The string quartet missed a beat, the cellist's bow stuttering across the strings. Owen gripped Kael's arm harder. Control it. I am controlling it. You are not. You are leaking dominance like a cracked pipe, and every wolf in this room can feel it. Pull it back or we will have a scene. Kael closed his eyes, breathed, pulled the pressure back inside his skin, back behind his ribs, back into the cage where he kept the parts of himself that would destroy everything he had built if he let them out. It took effort, more effort than it should have. He opened his eyes. Seraphina was looking at him. She had lifted her head from where it had been close to Dominic's shoulder, and she was looking directly at Kael across 60 feet of crowded dance floor, with the precision of a marksman finding a target. Her eyes were brown, not gold, not silver, the calm, steady brown of a woman who had absolute command of her wolf, and was choosing, deliberately, not to let it show. She did not flinch. She did not falter. She did not miss a step in the dance. She smiled. Not at him, at the space beside his left ear. The kind of smile you give a place you used to live when you drive past it years later, and notice they painted the door a different color. Recognition without attachment. Memory without longing. Then she turned back to Dominic, and Dominic said something that made her laugh, and the sound of her laughter crossed the ballroom like a blade, and found every soft part of Kael that he thought he had armored over. His wolf howled. Not the silent internal grieving that had become his baseline. A full-throated, roaring howl that filled his skull and whited out his vision for one full second. He tasted copper. His hands shook. Owen removed the cracked glass from his hand and replaced it with nothing. Breathe. You are the Alpha King. Act like it. Who is she to him? I do not know. I will find out. But not now. Not while you look like you are about to cross that dance floor and start a war. Kael forced his eyes away from her. It felt like ripping tape off a wound. He stared at the stone wall behind the bar and breathed until his heartbeat dropped below crisis levels and his hands stopped shaking. She is different, he said. Different how? Everything. The way she moves, the way she holds herself, the way the wolves around her orient toward her, without realizing they are doing it. She is not the same person. It has been 3 years. People change. Not like this. This is not change. This is replacement. The woman on that dance floor is not the girl I rejected. Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, carefully, is that a problem or a relief? Kael looked at his gamma. It is a disaster, because I wanted her when she was the girl. And the woman she has become is going to take me apart. Across the ballroom, Seraphina danced. She danced with Dominic, and then with an alpha from the Western clans named Patrick Hale, an older man with kind eyes who talked too much about fishing. She danced with Marin's beta Nora, who had come to the summit as Marin's representative, while the alpha stayed behind to manage a minor border issue that was really just an excuse because Marin hated parties. She danced and she smiled, and she spoke to every wolf who approached her with the warm, steady authority of someone who belonged exactly where she was. She accepted compliments without preening. She deflected questions about her silver eyes with a humor that was dry and self-aware, and just evasive enough to make people want to ask again. She was magnificent, and she knew Kael was watching her. She could feel his gaze, like heat on the side of her face, like a hand hovering an inch from her skin. The severed bond between them was not a dead thing. It was a live wire, stripped of its insulation, sparking in the dark. She felt every pulse of his dominance aura, every surge of his wolf, every wave of emotion that he thought he was hiding and was not hiding at all. She did not care. She had spent 3 years learning how to not care, and she had gotten very good at it. And if her wolf was pacing inside her chest with an agitation that had nothing to do with the dancing, and everything to do with the 6'2" disaster standing by the eastern archway, that was her wolf's problem, not hers. Dominic leaned in during their second dance. The Blackmore Alpha has not stopped staring at you since you walked in. I know. Should I be concerned? About what? About the fact that he cracked a crystal glass with his bare hand when he saw us dancing. Seraphina's mouth twitched. Not a smile. The ghost of one. He has a temper. That was not a temper. That was a wolf looking at something he considers his. He gave up that claim 3 years ago. Does his wolf know that? His wolf is not my responsibility. Dominic studied her face. He was a good reader of people, which was part of what made him a good alpha, and he could see the layers in her expression, the way you can see the rings in a cut tree. The surface composure. Beneath that, a controlled wariness, and beneath that, buried so deep that most people would miss it entirely. Something that was not indifference at all. You still feel it, he said. Not a question. A severed bond does not disappear. It scars over. The scar can still ache. And is it aching now? She looked at him. Are you asking as my ally or as my friend? As the man whose hand is currently on your back, in full view of an alpha king who looks like he could bench press this mountain. She laughed. A real one. Warm and unexpected, and loud enough that heads turned. And Kael, across the room, felt it land in his chest, like a stone dropped into still water. He will not do anything, she said. He is too smart, too political, too aware of what it would cost him to make a scene at the summit. You sound very certain. I was his mate for about 90 seconds. That was enough time to understand exactly how his mind works. And how does his mind work? Seraphina considered this. Like a chess player who is terrified of losing. He will sacrifice anything to protect the king, including the queen. Dominic was quiet for a moment, then he said, the problem with that strategy is that in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. Seraphina looked at him, he looked back. An understanding passed between them that had nothing to do with romance, and everything to do with the kind of respect that forms between two people who recognize each other's capacity for destruction. I like you, Dominic Vale, she said. I like you too, Seraphina Voss. Try not to bring down the mountain tonight. The dance ended. The music shifted to something slower, something the string quartet played with the lazy confidence of musicians who knew they were good. Seraphina stepped back from Dominic, thanked him, and made her way toward the terrace. She needed air. She needed the cold. She needed 30 seconds where she was not being watched by 300 wolves, and one wolf in particular whose gaze sat on her skin like a fingerprint she could not wipe off. The terrace was empty. The stone railing was cold under her hands, the granite rough and real, and satisfyingly solid. The valley stretched out below her, dark forest rolling toward distant mountains that were just visible as a darker line against the star-thick sky. The wind came up from the valley floor carrying the smell of pine and cold earth, and the faint mineral tang of running water far below. She stood there and breathed, in, out, in. Her wolf stirred. Not the agitated pacing from the ballroom, something quieter, something that felt like the first tremor before an earthquake. She heard his footsteps before she heard his voice. Heavy, deliberate, the footsteps of a man who was making sure she knew he was coming, giving her time to leave if she wanted to. A courtesy, the first one he had ever offered her. She did not leave. She kicked off her shoes. The cold granite bit into her bare feet, and the small sharp pain of it grounded her in her body. In this moment, in the reality that in approximately 4 seconds, Kael Ashford was going to step onto this terrace, and she was going to have to look at him and not feel anything. She could do that. She had practiced. The terrace door opened behind her. His scent hit her first. Cedar and smoke, and something metallic that might have been adrenaline. Her wolf went absolutely still, the way a predator goes still when it spots something it has been tracking for a very long time. Seraphina did not turn around. She looked at the valley. She held her shoes in one hand. She waited. Your dominance aura is showing, Ashford, she said. You might want to rein that in before you start something you cannot finish. He stopped walking. She could hear his breathing. It was not steady. Good. You are with Ironcrest. His voice was lower than she remembered. Rougher, like something had been scraping against the inside of his throat for 3 years. I am with myself. She turned then, and the sight of him up close, after 3 years and 1,000 miles, and a bond that should have killed everything she felt for him, landed in her chest with the force of a car wreck. He was taller than she remembered, or she had shrunk him in her memory, made him smaller so he would fit into a box she could manage. He had not gotten smaller. The scar on his jaw was new. The shadows under his eyes were not. He looked like a man who had been winning at everything except the one thing that mattered. The moonlight caught her eyes. Silver ringed the brown. A thin, luminous border that pulsed once and then steadied. Kael saw it. She watched him see it. Watched something recalibrate behind his expression. A rapid reassessment of what he was dealing with. The realization landing on him, like a wave, that the woman in front of him was not the girl he had dismissed. Dominic is an ally, she said. A friend, occasionally more. None of which is your business. You are my mate. I was. She held his gaze. You handled that. In front of everyone. By firelight. Do you need me to remind you of the exact words? Or does your wolf replay them often enough? He stepped closer. She did not step back. 3 years ago, his proximity would have buckled her knees. The bond would have demanded it, pulled her toward him with a gravity that overrode conscious choice. Now, she held her ground, the way bedrock holds ground, without effort, without decision, simply by being what she was. I made a mistake, he said. You made a choice. Her voice did not waver. Mistakes are accidental. You rehearsed that rejection, Kael. I watched you take a breath before you said it. You steadied yourself. You made sure your voice did not crack. That is not a mistake. That is architecture. The word hit him. Architecture. She had taken the rubble of what he destroyed and built something from it, and she was letting him see the plans. Sarah, do not. The silver ring around her irises flared, brightening for a half-second before settling back. The stone railing under her hand cracked. A spiderweb of fractures spreading from her fingertips, silent and sudden, like ice breaking on a pond. Neither of them looked at it. You do not get to shorten my name anymore. You gave that up with everything else. Somewhere inside the ballroom, a tray of glasses hit the floor. The wolves inside could feel what was happening on the terrace, the way you feel a thunderstorm approaching. 2 apex-level wolves standing 4 feet apart, the remains of a bond arcing between them like electricity jumping between severed wires. The smarter wolves were already finding reasons to be near the exits. Kael's wolf was tearing at him. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to close the distance, to take her hands, to drop to his knees if that was what it required. He did none of those things. He stood there and let her look at him, really look. The circles under his eyes, the new scar, the way his hands trembled at his sides, not from anger but from the effort of keeping them where they were. I am not asking you to come back, he said. Good, because I would not. I am asking you to let me earn the right to stand in whatever room you are in. Seraphina stared at him for a long time. The valley wind pulled at her dress, at her hair, at the silence between them that was so full of unsaid things, it was practically a third person on the terrace. Earning is difficult for kings, she said. They are used to taking. She picked up her shoes. She walked past him close enough that her shoulder brushed his chest. A contact so brief and so devastating that his wolf went silent for the first time in 3 years. Not quiet, silent, as if the animal inside him had held its breath and forgotten to let it out. She disappeared back into the ballroom. The light and music swallowed her whole. Kael stayed on the terrace until his hands stopped trembling. It took longer than he wanted to admit. The valley wind cut through his jacket and he did not move. The stars wheeled overhead and he did not move. Owen came to the terrace door twice, looked at him, and went back inside without speaking. On his third visit, Owen said, "The summit dinner starts in 10 minutes. I know. Can you sit through a meal?" Kael turned from the railing. His face was composed. His eyes were dry. His wolf was still silent, curled in his chest like something wounded and waiting. I have been sitting through meals for 3 years, he said. One more will not end me. He walked back into the ballroom. He sat through the dinner. He ate food he could not taste, and made conversation he could not remember, and watched, from the corner of his eye, as Seraphina sat 3 tables away, between Dominic Vale and a silver pine wolf he did not recognize, laughing at something, touching the stem of her glass, alive and whole and luminous, in a room full of wolves who were all, whether they knew it or not, orbiting her like planets around a new sun. She did not look at him again for the rest of the night. That was worse than anything she could have said. The morning after the summit dinner, Kael found Owen in the corridor outside his guest quarters. Owen was leaning against the wall with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of a man who had slept about as well as his alpha, which was to say, not at all. I asked around, Owen said, handing Kael a cup. And? Seraphina Voss arrived at the Silver Pine Pack 3 years ago. She has been training with their head enforcer, a wolf named Connor Gray, who is apparently the kind of trainer who makes his students want to cry and then thank him for it. 6 months ago, their alpha, Marin Cole, named her Enforcer Prime, a title that did not exist before Seraphina arrived. Enforcer Prime. It is apparently a step below Beta, but with more authority in the field. She runs their border operations, trains their fighters, and by all accounts, has turned Silver Pine's defense capability from a joke into something the neighboring packs are genuinely nervous about. Kael drank his coffee. It was too hot and too bitter, and he did not care. What about the Silver Eyes? Owen hesitated. There was an incident. A rogue attack on Silver Pine's southern border about 2 years ago. 9 rogues, organized, hit their patrol during a shift change. Seraphina intervened. According to the wolves who were there, her eyes went silver, and she produced a dominance wave strong enough to drop 9 rogues without physical contact. The corridor was silent, except for the distant echo of other delegations moving through the stone hall. That is Alpha-class power, Kael said. That is beyond Alpha-class power. I spoke to Patrick Hale last night. He danced with her. He said standing near her felt like standing near a lightning rod during a storm. His wolf wanted to submit, and Patrick Hale has not submitted to anyone in 20 years. Where does it come from? Her mother's side. Apparently Helen Voss was born Helen Ashworth, the Ashworth line. Kael set down his coffee. The Ashworth name was not spoken often. It belonged to wolf history, the way certain words belong to old books, recognized, but no longer used in daily conversation. The Ashworths were the founding line, the wolves who had organized the first packs, whose blood carried an authority so deep that it preceded hierarchy, preceded territory, preceded everything the modern wolf world had built on top of it. She does not just have alpha blood, Kael said slowly. She has original alpha blood. Yes. And I rejected her in front of 300 wolves because her father was a traitor. Owen said nothing. There was nothing to say. The mathematics of the situation were so catastrophically obvious that words would only make them worse. Kael picked up his coffee again, drank it, stared at the stone wall across the corridor, and felt the full, crushing weight of a mistake that had compounded over 3 years, like interest on a debt he could never repay. There is more, Owen said. Of course there is. Dominic Volel. They are not mated. They are not in a formal relationship, but they are close. My sources say they have been meeting privately for about a year. Political alliance, strategic partnership, but there is a personal element. Dominic is protective of her, not in a possessive way, in the way of a man who respects what he is standing next to. Is she in his pack? No, she remains Silver Pine. Marin Cole guards her like a crown jewel. Whatever Seraphina's relationship with Dominic is, it operates between the packs, not within one. Kael was quiet for a long time. The coffee went cold in his hands. She told me I could earn the right to stand in whatever room she is in, he said. That is more generous than you deserve. I know. She could have told you to fall off a cliff. She could have. What are you going to do? Kael looked at Owen. His gamma looked back. They had known each other since they were 15, had trained together, fought together, survived the chaos of Kael's early reign together. Owen was the one person in the Blackmore pack who could look at Kael without deference and tell him the truth without fear. I am going to find her before the summit ends, Kael said, and I am going to do something I have never done in my life. What is that? Ask? He found her in the lower gallery. It was a narrow chamber off the main hall, lined with carvings that predated the pack system. Wolves and moons and spirals etched into the stone by hands that had been dust for centuries. She was standing in front of a carving of 2 wolves, facing each other, heads lowered, not in aggression, but in the posture of recognition. The carving was old enough that the details had softened, edges rounded by time, until the wolves looked like they were dissolving back into the stone they had been born from. She heard him coming. She always would. You found the bonding wall, she said without turning. He stopped 10 feet behind her. A respectful distance, a deliberate one. I did not know it was called that. Marin told me about it. This is where the original pacts formalized mate bonds. Before the bonfire ceremonies, before the public rituals. It was private. Just two wolves, this wall, and the willingness to be seen. She turned to face him. In the dim gallery light, her eyes were dark. No silver, no gold, just the deep brown of a woman who was giving him nothing he had not earned. I need to say something to you, he said. I need you to hear it without deciding in advance that it is not enough. That is a big ask. I know. She leaned against the carved wall, crossed her arms, waited. 3 years ago, I was a boy wearing a crown that was too heavy for him. My father had just died. My pack was fracturing along fault lines that had been invisible until they were not. Your last name was a wound that half my council could not look at without bleeding, and I was terrified, Seraphina. Not of you, of what choosing you would cost me. She said nothing. So I chose the pack over the bond. I chose stability over you. I told myself it was leadership. It was not. It was cowardice dressed up in duty. I was afraid that loving you would make me weak, and I was too young and too stupid to understand that the willingness to be vulnerable for the right person is the strongest thing an alpha can do. The gallery was silent. The ancient wolves on the wall watched with their eroded eyes. I am not asking for forgiveness, he said. Forgiveness implies that what I did can be undone, and it cannot. I broke something that night. I broke it in you, and I broke it in me, and I have spent 3 years pretending I did not. I am done pretending. Seraphina's arms were still crossed. Her face was still guarded, but something had shifted in her posture. A micro-relaxation in her shoulders that someone who was not watching her with desperate attention would have missed entirely. What do you want, Kael? I want to know if the woman you have become would consider giving the man I am trying to become a chance to be worthy of standing next to her, not behind her, not in front of her, next to her. And if I say no, then I go home. I respect it. And I spend the rest of my life knowing that the bravest thing I ever did was ask, and the worst thing I ever did was make asking necessary. 2. The silence stretched. A minute. 2. The stone walls held it the way old buildings hold sound, absorbing it into their mass, making it part of their structure. You practiced that speech, she said. Parts of it. Which parts? The beginning. The middle fell apart about 10 seconds in. I had more planned. I forgot all of it when you looked at me. Something moved across her face. Not a smile, not forgiveness. Something older and more complicated than either. The kind of expression you see on the face of a person who has built a fortress and is standing on the wall watching someone approach, not with an army, but with open hands. Marin told me something once, Seraphina said. She said that wolves mate for life, but humans love by choice, and that the wolves who survive are the ones who learn to do both. What does that mean? It means my wolf has never stopped recognizing you. The bond is severed, but the recognition is not. My wolf knows what you are to her. She has known since the bonfire. Kael's chest tightened. But I am not just my wolf, Seraphina continued. I am also the woman who walked into those trees with nothing and built a life from the ground up. I am the wolf who found power she did not know she had and learned to carry it without breaking. I am the enforcer prime of the Silverpine Pack, and I answer to Marin Cole and to myself and to no one else. She pushed off the wall, took one step toward him. 1. If you want to stand next to me, Kael Ashford, you do not get to start from where we left off. You start from 0. You start from the place where you are a stranger who happens to share a history with me, and you earn every inch of ground between that starting line and whatever finish line we end up at. You earn it publicly. You earn it where your pack can see. The same pack that watched you reject me gets to watch you prove that you have changed. That will be humiliating. Yes, my council will hate it. Probably. It could take years. It could. He looked at her. She looked back. The ancient wolves on the wall looked at both of them with the patience of creatures who had been waiting a very long time for two stubborn people to stop circling each other and start walking in the same direction. Then I start from 0, he said. Seraphina did not smile. She nodded. Once. The kind of nod that seals something heavier than a contract and lighter than a promise. She walked past him toward the gallery exit. At the doorway, she stopped. She did not turn around. The dress was Nora's idea, she said. She said it would make your wolf lose his mind. It worked. I know. She paused. Good night, Kael. Good night, Seraphina. She left. The gallery settled back into its ancient quiet. Kael stood in front of the bonding wall and looked at the two carved wolves, heads lowered, facing each other across a distance that had once been nothing and was now everything. He pressed his palm flat against the stone. It was cold, solid, real. His wolf stirred, not a howl, not the grinding, grieving silence of the last 3 years. Something new, a low, steady hum, the kind of sound a wolf makes when it has caught a scent it knows and is settling in for the long tracking that lies ahead. Kael closed his eyes, breathed, opened them. 0. He was starting from 0. He left the gallery and walked back to his quarters, and for the first time in 3 years, he slept without dreaming. The summit ended the next afternoon. Alliances were signed in the formal chamber, ink drying on parchment, while wolves shook hands and measured each other's grip strength. Dominic Vale signed a mutual defense agreement with 2 eastern packs. Patrick Hale brokered a trade corridor through disputed territory that had been deadlocked for 6 years. The machinery of wolf politics ground forward, as it always did, lubricated by champagne and self-interest, and the ancient understanding that cooperation was cheaper than conflict. Kael signed 3 agreements of his own. His hand was steady, his mind was elsewhere. Dominic found him in the corridor afterward. The Ironcrest Alpha leaned against the opposite wall and regarded Kael with the expression of a man who was about to enjoy himself. "You look terrible," Dominic said. "Thank you. I assume the terrace conversation did not go the way you planned." "I did not have a plan." "That tracks." Dominic pushed off the wall. He was half a head shorter than Kael but carried himself with the kind of gravity that made height irrelevant. "I am going to tell you something, and you are going to listen, and then we are going to pretend this conversation never happened." Kael waited. "Seraphina is the most remarkable wolf I have ever met. She is also the most guarded. Whatever you broke in her when you said those words at your bonfire, she rebuilt it stronger, and she rebuilt it closed. The woman you saw on that dance floor is not performing confidence. She is confident. She is not pretending to be whole. She is whole. And the fact that she gave you any opening at all, even a crack, tells me something about what you meant to her before you destroyed it. Are you warning me or encouraging me? I am informing you. If you waste this chance, I will not feel sorry for you. And if you hurt her again, our next conversation will not be this polite." Dominic extended his hand. Kael took it. Their grip was firm and brief, and loaded with the kind of mutual understanding that exists between 2 men who respect the same woman for different reasons. Dominic left. Kael watched him go. The delegations departed the stone hall in waves, pack by pack, their vehicles and wolves filtering down the mountain roads in ordered convoys. Kael rode in the back of the lead vehicle, with Owen beside him, and Eliza in the front seat, reviewing the signed agreements on her tablet. "You are quiet," Owen said. "I am thinking. About how you start from 0 when you are a king." Owen looked out the window at the passing forest. "You stop being a king for a while. You be a man. Men know how to start from nothing. Kings have forgotten." Kael considered this for the remaining 3 hours of the drive home. 3 weeks after the summit, a letter arrived at Silverpine. Not an email, not a phone call. A letter, written on heavy cream-colored paper with the Blackmore seal pressed into the top, the kind of formal correspondence that packs used for declarations of alliance, territorial claims, and the sort of communications that were meant to be taken seriously by serious wolves. Nora brought it to Seraphina during morning training. She was mid-drill with Connor, both of them sweating in the October cold, breath fogging between strikes. Connor saw the sealed letter and raised an eyebrow. "Official communication from Blackmore Pack," Nora said. "Addressed to you specifically." "To me?" "To Seraphina Voss, Alpha Ascendant of the Silverpine Accord. Full title, full formal address." Connor wiped his face with a towel. "Alpha Ascendant? When did that happen?" "Marin conferred the title 2 weeks ago," Nora said. Quietly, without ceremony. She said Seraphina had earned it, and that making a production out of it would be embarrassing for everyone involved. "I was not aware I had a title," Seraphina said. "You do. It is in the registry. Marin filed the paperwork herself." Nora held out the letter. and apparently Kael Ashford is aware of it too. Seraphina took the letter. The seal was thick and smooth under her thumb. She broke it. Read it standing in the training yard with pine needles sticking to her boots, and Connor's towel draped over one shoulder. The letter was formal, precise, written in the careful, measured language of diplomatic communication, the kind of prose that had been reviewed by advisors and vetted for political implications before the ink was dry. It requested a meeting, a formal diplomatic engagement between the Alpha King of the Blackmore Pack and the Alpha Ascendant of the Silverpine Accord, for the purpose of discussing a mutual defense treaty along the northern corridor where rogue activity had been increasing steadily for the past year. The letter cited specific incidents, recent incursions along shared border regions, intelligence suggesting the rogues were organized and funded by an external party whose identity remained unknown. The proposal was for a joint defense initiative, coordinated patrols, shared intelligence, combined response protocols. It was thorough. It was professional. It was exactly the kind of proposal that any competent Alpha would consider on its strategic merits alone. It was also, unmistakably, a love letter, dressed in political clothing. Not because of anything it said, because of what it did not say. There was no mention of the summit, no reference to the terrace or the gallery or the cracked glass or the cracked stone railing. No personal note, no handwritten addition, no break in the formal language that would have given Seraphina permission to read it as anything other than what it presented itself to be. But he had used her full title, Alpha Ascendant of the Silverpine Accord, a title that was 2 weeks old, and that he should not have known about unless he had been paying very close attention to Silverpine's internal affairs. Using it was a statement. It said, "I see what you have become. I acknowledge it publicly. I will address you as what you are, not as what you were." Seraphina read the letter twice. Then she folded it along its creases and looked at Connor. "Finish the drill without me," she said. "I need to talk to Marin." Marin was in her cabin, which was where Marin always was when she was not walking the borders, or settling disputes, or doing any of the 100 small daily tasks that kept a pack running. The cabin was warm and smelled like cedar and old books, and the particular brand of whiskey that Marin ordered from a distillery in Vermont that did not know its best customer was a wolf. Seraphina put the letter on the table between them. Marin read it with her glasses perched on the end of her nose, her expression betraying nothing. She read it again. She set it down. "He used your full title," she said. "I noticed. That cost him something. With his counsel, with his pride. The Blackmore Pack still carries the wound of your father's betrayal. For their Alpha King to formally address the daughter of Graham Voss as an equal, using a title that positions you as a sovereign entity within the pack system, that is not just diplomacy. That is a public statement of respect that his advisors would have fought against." "I know. And the treaty itself is sound. The rogue activity along the northern corridor is real. We have been dealing with increased incursions for months. A coordinated defense with Blackmore would benefit us, strategically." "I know that too." Marin took off her glasses, folded them, set them on the letter. "So what are you going to do?" Seraphina looked out the window. The silverpine tree line stood dark against a pale sky, the kind of sky that could not decide if it wanted to rain or clear. She had walked into those trees 3 years ago with nothing except a green jacket and the determination to become someone who could never be discarded again. She had done that. She had built it with her own hands, her own sweat, her own stubborn refusal to be defined by the worst night of her life. She had earned the respect of wolves who had no reason to give it to her. She had discovered power she did not know she carried. She had become, by every measure that mattered, exactly the kind of wolf she had needed to be when she was 20 years old and standing in front of a bonfire, watching her future collapse. And now the man who had collapsed it was standing at the border, holding a letter that said everything he could not say out loud, asking for permission to exist in her proximity. "I am going to make him wait," Seraphina said, "and then I am going to show up as exactly what he threw away." Marin looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not the tactical smile of an alpha evaluating a strategic move. The warm, proud smile of a woman who had watched a broken girl become an unbreakable force, and understood that the transformation was its own kind of miracle. "Good," Marin said. "Make him work for it." Seraphina picked up the letter. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the paper, the formality of it, the carefully restrained intention behind every measured word. "He will work for it," she said. "He will work harder for this than he has ever worked for anything. Because I am not a treaty to be negotiated. I am not a territory to be claimed. I am not a bond to be severed and reattached when it becomes convenient. What are you?" Seraphina folded the letter and put it in her jacket pocket. "I am the consequence of his worst decision. And consequences do not come cheap." She left the cabin, the door closed behind her with a solid wooden sound. Marin sat alone at her table and poured herself a measure of the Vermont whiskey and drank it slowly, looking at the empty chair across from her. "That girl is going to change the world," she said to no one. "And the world is not ready." The response arrived at Blackmore 3 days later. It was brief. It was formal. It accepted the proposed meeting and suggested a date 3 weeks hence, at a neutral location along the border, with appropriate security delegations from both packs. It was signed Seraphina Voss, Alpha Ascendant, Silver Pine Accord. Kael read it in his study. The room was dark except for the lamp on his desk, a pool of warm light in an otherwise empty space. The chair across from his desk was unoccupied, as it always was. He had never put anyone in it. The space felt reserved, held open for a presence he could not name but could not release. He read the letter 3 times. Then he set it down and pressed his palms flat on the desk and breathed. She had said yes. Not to him, not to the bond, not to anything resembling the personal reckoning he had offered her in the gallery. She had said yes to a meeting, a formal, political, professionally distanced meeting about border security and shared intelligence. It was the smallest possible yes, the thinnest crack in the thickest wall. It was enough. Owen appeared in the doorway. He looked at the letter on the desk, looked at Kael's face. "She agreed," Owen said. "She agreed. To the meeting. To the meeting." "And the other thing?" Kael leaned back in his chair. His wolf was humming again, that low, steady vibration that had started in the gallery and had not stopped since, a frequency that sat just below his heartbeat and colored everything with a patience he had not known he was capable of. "The other thing starts from 0, he said. "This is step 1. Step 1 of how many? As many as it takes." Owen looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded, turned, and left the study. Kael sat alone. The lamp hummed. The letter sat on his desk, cream-colored paper with neat handwriting and a signature that contained an entire woman's worth of history and pain and power. His pack would feel the shift. They were already feeling it. The Alpha King, who had ruled from grief and compensated with efficiency, was becoming something else. Not softer, not weaker, something that the old wolves, the ones who remembered the way things used to be before the pack system turned everything into politics and posturing, would recognize. The old wolves had a word for it. They called it longing with teeth. It meant the kind of desire that does not beg, does not chase, does not break down doors. It waits, it watches, it shows up every day and does the work, and trusts that the work will speak louder than any declaration. Kael Ashford had spent 3 years learning how to be a king. Now he was going to learn something harder, how to be worthy of a queen. He did not know how long it would take. He did not know if she would ever let him close enough to matter. He did not know if the bond, severed and scarred over and buried under 3 years of silence, could regenerate into something that 2 older, wiser, more damaged wolves could build a life on. He knew one thing. He was going to show up. Every meeting, every formal engagement, every carefully distanced, professionally appropriate, politically justified encounter that brought him into the same room as Seraphina Voss. He was going to show up and be steady, and be patient, and be present, and he was going to let her see the man he was becoming, instead of telling her about it, because he had learned the hard way that words without evidence are just noise. And across 2 territories and 100 miles of old-growth forest, Seraphina stood at the edge of Silver Pine's eastern border and looked south toward Blackmore. Her wolf was quiet, not the enforced silence of suppression, the settled, watchful quiet of an animal who has caught a scent and is deciding whether to follow it. She had spent 3 years becoming someone who could not be destroyed by the choices of others. She had done it. She was that person. The fortress was built. The walls were high. The foundations went deep. And now someone was standing outside those walls, not with an army, Not with demands. Not with the arrogant assumption that the door would open because he wanted it to. He was standing there with a letter, and a title, and the willingness to start from nothing. She reached into her jacket pocket and touched the folded paper. The creases were sharp under her fingertips. The formality of it was almost touching, the way a powerful man's attempt at humility is always a little clumsy, a little overdone, a little transparent in its effort. But the effort was real. She could feel that much. Through the dead bond, through the scar tissue, through the 100 miles of forest and politics and history that separated them, the effort was real. It was not enough, not yet, not by a considerable distance, but it was a start. Seraphina turned from the border and walked back toward the silver pine compound. The trees closed behind her, tall and dark and patient, the way forests are patient, the way wolves are patient, the way love is patient, when it has survived the thing that should have ended it, and emerged on the other side with scars and silver eyes and a quiet, ferocious determination to do it right this time, or not at all. The wind shifted, south to north, carrying nothing but pine and cold air and the faintest suggestion of cedar and smoke from a territory she had once been expelled from and might, someday, return to on her own terms. Her wolf stirred, settled, waited. Somewhere south of the border, his wolf did the same. The world between them was wide and wounded and full of the kind of possibility that only exists when two people have already survived the worst version of each other and chosen, against all evidence and instinct and self-preservation, to believe that the best version might still be ahead. It was not a love story, not yet. It was something harder and rarer and more valuable. It was a choice. The first meeting took place on neutral ground, a lodge at the territorial boundary, owned by no pack, maintained by all of them. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, a long table with chairs on either side like a chessboard made of furniture. Kael arrived first. He brought Owen and Eliza and 4 enforcers who stood along the walls like well-dressed shadows. He wore a dark jacket over a plain shirt, no crown. No ceremonial regalia, no visual reminder of the rank differential between an alpha king and an alpha ascendant. That was deliberate. Owen had suggested the formal attire. Kael had refused. She will see through it, he had said. She will see a king trying to impress, not a man trying to earn. Seraphina arrived 20 minutes late, also deliberate. She brought Connor and 2 silverpine wolves Kael did not recognize. She wore her training clothes, dark pants, boots, a leather jacket with a scratch along one sleeve that she had not bothered to repair. Her hair was pulled back in a knot, no makeup, no effort at presentation. She sat down across from him and opened a folder. The rogue incursions along the northern corridor have increased by 40% in the last 6 months, she said. Silverpine has documented 17 incidents. Our intelligence suggests they are being coordinated from somewhere outside the recognized pack territories, possibly from the unclaimed zone north of the Ashford River. She did not say hello. She did not acknowledge the summit, the terrace, the gallery, or any of the 1,000 unspoken things that sat in the air between them, like furniture in a dark room. She talked about border security. For 2 hours. Kael matched her. He presented Blackmore's intelligence on the rogue movements. He shared patrol schedules and response protocols, and the results of a tracking operation his wolves had run along the eastern perimeter 3 weeks ago. He was thorough. He was professional. He was the best version of the Alpha King that his pack had ever seen. And underneath all of it, beneath the data and the strategy and the measured professional distance, he watched her. The way she leaned forward when a data point interested her. The way she tapped her pen against the table when she was thinking. The way she argued with Owen about patrol intervals with a precision and confidence that made his Gamma, a man who argued for a living, actually concede a point. She was extraordinary. Not the extraordinary of beauty or power, though she had both. The extraordinary of competence, of a mind that had been sharpened by adversity until it cut through problems the way her wolf cut through forest. Watching her work was like watching a blade find the angle it was made for. The meeting ended at sunset. They had produced a draft treaty, 12 pages of coordinated defense protocols that would make both packs stronger and the rogues considerably less comfortable. It was good work, meaningful work. The kind of work that justified the meeting on its own merits, no hidden agenda required. Seraphina gathered her folder, stood, extended her hand. Kael took it. The contact lasted 2 seconds, palm against palm, firm grip, professional, correct. But the place where their skin met burned, not with pain. With recognition, the severed bond, that dead wire buried under 3 years of scar tissue, pulsed once, just once. A single heartbeat of connection that traveled up both their arms and settled somewhere behind their ribs. Seraphina let go first. Her face betrayed nothing. Her wolf, deep inside her chest, exhaled. "Same time next month?" she said. "We will need to review the patrol coordination before we implement." "Same time next month," Kael agreed. She left. Her team followed. The lodge door closed behind them. The room settled into the quiet of a space that had held something important and was still vibrating with the residue of it. Owen looked at Kael. "Well?" he said. Kael looked at his hand, the hand that had held hers. The palm that still carried the ghost of her touch like a brand he could feel but not see. "Step 2, he said. Owen shook his head. But there was something in his expression that might have been respect, or maybe hope. In wolves, the two often looked the same. They drove home through the dark. The forest scrolled past the windows, mile after mile of territory that Kael had spent 3 years defending and expanding and shaping into something worthy of the Ashford name. He had done it for the pack, for duty, for the legacy his father had left and the future his children would inherit. Now he had a reason that sat deeper than duty, deeper than legacy, a reason that had brown eyes and silver fire, and a handshake that lasted 2 seconds, and rewired something fundamental in the architecture of his chest. He was starting from 0. He had promised that. And 0, it turned out, was not nothing. 0 was the place where the counting begins. The place where every number that comes after has to be earned, one by one, through the slow and patient work of showing up and being worthy and trusting that the person on the other side of the table could see the difference between a king who takes and a man who asks. Seraphina could see the difference. She had always been able to see it. That was why she had not cried at the bonfire, why she had walked into the trees instead of falling to her knees. She had seen, in that terrible moment, the exact nature of the man who was choosing to break her. And she had decided, with a clarity that would define the next 3 years of her life, that she would become someone who could never be broken by that kind of man again. She had done it, and now that kind of man was changing. Whether the change would be enough, whether the distance between 0 and enough could be crossed by 2 wolves who had already failed each other in the most public and painful way possible, was a question that neither of them could answer yet. But they were both willing to find out. And in the world of wolves, where bonds are ancient and grudges are longer, and the forest remembers every footprint ever pressed into its soil, the willingness to try is the rarest and most dangerous form of courage there is.